The last rays of sunset painted the vast Arizona sky with streaks of crimson and gold, as Olivia Oakley stood alone on the creaking porch of her late father's cabin, staring at the 5 grim-faced men who'd surrounded her property like vultures eyeing a carcass. "You've got until dawn, Miss Oakley," growled Silas Murdoch, the tallest of the claim jumpers, his weathered face twisted with malice beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Either sign over your daddy's gold claim or we'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." Arizona Territory, 1875. 3 months ago, Olivia had been teaching school children back east when she received word that her father had struck gold in his small mining claim just outside Copper Canyon. 2 months ago, she'd gotten another letter saying he was ill. By the time she'd made the arduous journey west, crossing half a continent by train, stagecoach, and finally on horseback, Thomas Oakley had been buried for 2 weeks, and strangers were already circling what was rightfully hers. "This land is mine by law," Olivia declared, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I have the deed papers to prove it." Murdoch spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Papers don't mean much out here, lady. Your pa owed us money, lots of it." It was a lie, and Olivia knew it. Her father had written about Murdoch and his gang dangerous men who'd been trying to intimidate the smaller claim holders into selling out. Now that her father was gone, they assumed she'd be easy pickings. "I'll go to the marshal," she threatened, though she knew the nearest lawman was in a town 2 days' ride away. The men laughed, a cold sound that scattered the chickens pecking in the yard. "Dawn, Miss Oakley," Murdoch repeated, turning his horse. "Think on it overnight. We ain't partial to killing women, but business is business." As they rode away in a cloud of dust, Olivia fought against the trembling in her hands. She had no weapons beyond her father's old shotgun, and she'd never fired anything more dangerous than a cork gun at a county fair. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, an elderly Chinese man who had troubles enough of his own. Inside the cabin, she lit a lamp and sat at the rough-hewn table, staring at the deed to her father's claim. According to his letters, he'd found a promising vein, enough gold to set them both up comfortably. Not a fortune, but more than either of them had ever had. Now that dream seemed as fragile as morning mist. As night settled over the mountains, Olivia considered her options. She could run, abandoning everything her father had worked for. She could try to hold them off with the shotgun, though 5 against 1 made for poor odds. Or she could pray for a miracle. She chose the third option, though she hadn't stepped foot in a church since her mother's funeral 12 years ago. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her dreams haunted by the faces of Murdoch and his men. When she jerked awake for the 4th time, the cabin was still dark. Hours remained until dawn, but Olivia couldn't bear to lie still any longer. She rose, splashed water on her face from the basin, and made coffee in the cast iron pot. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her heart seized. They'd come early, hoping to catch her unprepared. Grabbing the shotgun, she checked that it was loaded and stepped onto the porch, prepared to make her stand, futile as it might be. But it wasn't 5 riders approaching in the dim pre-dawn light. It was just one. A lone figure on horseback, silhouetted against the lightening sky. As he drew closer, she could see he was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could tell he was watching her and the shotgun in her hands. "That's a mighty fine greeting," he called out, his voice carrying in the still morning air. It was a deep voice, tinged with a hint of amusement. "State your business," Olivia demanded, not lowering the gun. He reined his horse to a stop about 20 paces from the porch. "Name's Dawson Lawson. I hear you might be in need of some assistance." "Who told you that, old Wu?" "I stopped by his place last night." He mentioned some trouble was brewing out this way. Mr. Wu, her elderly neighbor, she hadn't thought he'd paid her situation any mind when she'd visited yesterday, desperately seeking advice. "I don't need charity," she said stiffly, not offering any. The stranger Dawson dismounted with fluid grace. "Just my gun and whatever else might help keep you alive." "Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" He shrugged, a casual roll of broad shoulders. "Let's just say I've got no love for claim jumpers. They're a special kind of vermin." As he stepped closer, the growing light revealed his features' strong jaw darkened with stubble, straight nose, and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the dandies back east, but there was something compelling about his face. It was the face of a man who'd seen trouble and hadn't flinched. "They'll be here soon," Olivia said, nodding toward the eastern horizon where pink and gold were bleeding into the deep blue of night. "5 of them, armed. I expected as much." He climbed the steps to the porch, moving with the loose-limbed ease of a predator. Up close, she could see the twin Colts strapped to his hips and the rifle in his saddle scabbard. This was a man who knew his way around weapons. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, still not lowering the shotgun. His lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "You shouldn't, not yet, but right now I'm the only chance you've got." As the first rays of sun crested the distant mountains, painting the porch in golden light, Olivia made her decision. She lowered the shotgun. "Coffee's hot inside," she said. "We've got maybe half an hour before they arrive." "That's plenty of time," Dawson replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I've done more with less." He followed her inside, ducking his head beneath the low door frame. In the confines of the cabin, he seemed even larger, filling the small space with his presence. Olivia poured coffee into a chipped mug and slid it across the table to him. "What's your plan? First, I need to know what we're dealing with. Tell me about these men." As she described Murdoch and his gang, Dawson listened intently, occasionally asking a pointed question. His eyes never stopped moving, taking in the cabin's layout, the windows, the back door. "Your pa found gold?" he asked when she'd finished. "Yes." "Not a huge strike, but enough to make it worthwhile. And you're determined to keep it. You could walk away, start fresh somewhere else." Olivia stiffened. "This is all I have left of my father, and he'd want me to fight for what's rightfully mine." Something flickered in Dawson's eyes, approval, perhaps. "Then we fight, but we do it smart." For the next 20 minutes he laid out his strategy. It was simple but effective, playing to their strengths and the cabin's defensive position. As he talked, Olivia found herself studying him. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his movements economical and precise. This was no drifter looking for easy money. He carried himself like a man with purpose. "You never said why you're really helping me," she pointed out when he finished explaining his plan. He took a long sip of coffee, regarding her over the rim of the mug. "Let's just say I've got a personal interest in seeing Murdoch and his kind get what they deserve." Before she could press further, he tensed, head tilting slightly. "Riders coming. 5 of them, just like you said." His voice was calm, but there was a new alertness to his posture, like a cougar preparing to spring. Olivia felt fear twist in her stomach, but she pushed it down. "What do we do?" "You take position by that window," he said, nodding to the one that overlooked the approach to the cabin. "Keep the shotgun ready but out of sight. Don't fire unless I signal. Let me do the talking." He checked his Colts, the motion so practiced it seemed almost unconscious. Then he gave her a look that somehow managed to be both reassuring and fierce. "Remember, Miss Oakley, they're expecting one frightened woman. not a woman with a gun and a very irritated cowboy. With that, he stepped onto the porch, positioning himself with his back to the cabin door, arms loose at his sides. The morning sun cast his shadow long across the weathered boards as he waited for the claim jumpers to arrive. Olivia took her position by the window, heart pounding so loudly she was certain it could be heard for miles. Through the wavy glass, she watched 5 riders approach in a cloud of dust, spreading out in a loose semicircle before the cabin. Murdoch was at the center, his face set in harsh lines of determination. "Well, well," he called out, reining his horse to a stop. "What have we here?" "Seems the lady's found herself a guard dog." "The lady's not interested in your offer," Dawson replied, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "I suggest you boys move along." Murdoch's laugh was as dry as the cracked earth beneath the horse's hooves. "1 man against 5. Those are poor odds, friend." "I like my odds just fine." Dawson hadn't moved, but there was something in his stance that made even Olivia, watching from inside, want to take a step back. The claim jumpers exchanged glances, their confidence visibly wavering. Clearly, they hadn't expected resistance, especially not from someone who looked like he knew how to handle himself in a fight. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Murdoch growled, his hand drifting toward the revolver on his hip. "Actually, I do." Dawson's voice had gone cold as a mountain stream. "Silas Murdoch, wanted in 3 territories for claim jumping, assault, and murder. That's a hanging offense, Silas." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Murdoch's weathered face. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who's giving you 1 chance to ride away. The law's already been notified. Marshal's on his way from Tucson." It was a bluff. The marshal was still 2 days away at best, but Olivia had to admire how convincing it sounded. One of Murdoch's men, a weasel-faced character with a patchy beard, leaned over to whisper something. Murdoch's expression darkened. "You're lying," he snarled. "There ain't no marshal coming." "Try me," Dawson challenged, still not moving, the tension stretched taut as a wire. Olivia held her breath, finger hovering near the shotgun's trigger. The air seemed to vibrate with the possibility of violence. Then, with a motion so swift it was almost a blur, Murdoch went for his gun. Dawson's draw was faster, impossibly fast. His Colt cleared leather before Murdoch's hand had fully closed around his revolver. The shot cracked across the yard, and Murdoch jerked backward, a red stain blossoming on his shoulder. What followed was chaos. 2 of Murdoch's men opened fire while the others scrambled for cover. Bullets splintered the wood around the porch as Dawson dove to one side, returning fire with deadly precision. "Now," he shouted to Olivia. She raised the shotgun and fired through the window, the blast deafening in the confined space. She wasn't aiming to kill, she couldn't bring herself to do that, but the shot scattered wide enough to send one of the men diving from his horse with a yelp of pain. Outside, Dawson had rolled behind a water barrel, firing steadily. One of the claim jumpers screamed and clutched his leg, collapsing into the dust. Another's hat flew off as a bullet passed close enough to part his hair. "We can end this now," Dawson called out, "or we can see how many of you are left standing when it's over." Murdoch, clutching his bleeding shoulder, had lost all his bravado. "Fall back," he yelled to his remaining men. They didn't need to be told twice, scrambling for their horses with more haste than dignity. As they galloped away, Murdoch turned in his saddle, face contorted with rage and pain. "This ain't over," he shouted. Dawson stood, gun still at the ready. "Actually, it is," he called after them. "Unless you're eager to meet the hangman." Only when the riders had disappeared in a cloud of dust did he lower his weapon. He turned to find Olivia on the porch, shotgun still clutched in white-knuckled hands. "You can lower that now," he said gently. "They won't be back any time soon." Her arms were trembling from the strain and the aftermath of fear. "You shot him. In the shoulder. He'll live to stand trial." Dawson holstered his gun. "Are you all right?" Olivia nodded, though she felt anything but all right. The violence, brief as it had been, had left her shaken. She'd never seen a man shot before, never been in the middle of gunfire. Yet beneath the shock was a surprising surge of exhilaration. They had won, against impossible odds. "You were amazing," she said, the words escaping before she could consider them. Something that might have been embarrassment crossed Dawson's face. "Just doing what needed doing." "How did you know who Murdoch was? That he's wanted?" Dawson's expression grew guarded. "I make it my business to know about men like him." Before she could question him further, he was moving past her into the cabin. "They'll be back with more men. We need to prepare." "But you said—" "I said they won't be back any time soon, but Murdoch's pride won't let this go." He began checking the windows, assessing the cabin's defensive positions. "We've got maybe a day before they return." Olivia set the shotgun aside and followed him. "Then we should go for help. The nearest town is too far. By the time we got there and back, they could have burned this place to the ground." "Then what do we do?" Dawson turned to face her, his expression resolute. "We make a stand, and we make it count." The next few hours passed in a flurry of activity. Dawson showed Olivia how to reload the shotgun properly and gave her some basic instruction in firing it. "Aim for the center of whatever you're shooting at," he advised. "Let the spread do the work." They moved furniture to create barricades near the windows, filled every available container with water in case of fire, and took stock of their ammunition. Through it all, Dawson worked with quiet efficiency, explaining each step so Olivia would understand not just what to do, but why they were doing it. As the sun climbed toward noon, they took a brief rest, sharing a meal of cornbread and salt pork that Olivia prepared. "You never did tell me why you stopped by Old Woo's place," she said as they ate. Dawson's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "I've been tracking Murdoch and his gang for a while. Word was they were operating in this area." "Why? Are you a lawman?" She'd wondered if he might be a marshal or deputy, but he wore no badge, not anymore. Something shadowed his eyes. "Let's just say I have my reasons." Olivia studied him across the table. There were layers to this man, depths she couldn't begin to fathom. Part of her knew she should be wary. He was, after all, a stranger who'd appeared at her door with guns and a mysterious past. Yet there was something about him that inspired trust. "My father came out here 3 years ago," she said, changing the subject. "After my mother died. He'd been a shopkeeper back east, but he always dreamed of finding gold. And he did." Dawson nodded toward the deed papers on the shelf. "Yes, though it took him years of struggling. He wrote to me about the claim jumpers, men like Murdoch who prey on those who strike it lucky. I never thought I'd be facing them myself." She paused. "I was planning to sell the claim, use the money to start a school." "Why don't you?" Olivia traced a pattern on the worn tabletop. "At first, it was just about honoring my father's wishes. But now—" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Now I think I understand why he loved this land. There's a freedom here you don't find back east." Dawson's eyes softened slightly. "It gets in your blood. The open spaces, the challenge of it. Not everyone understands that. Is that why you stay?" "Despite the dangers, partly." He rose, carrying his plate to the basin. "We should get back to work. There's still a lot to do before nightfall." As the afternoon wore on, Olivia found herself watching Dawson when he wasn't looking. The way he moved with such assurance, the quiet competence in his hands as he checked and cleaned his weapons. He was a man comfortable with himself and his abilities, something she'd rarely seen in the men back home, who were all polish and posture with little substance. By sunset, they had transformed the cabin into a miniature fortress. Dawson had dug shallow trenches on either side of the approach, both as defensive positions and to slow any charge. He'd strung nearly invisible wires between several trees' trip lines that would bring down a running man or horse. "We'll take watches tonight," he told her as they ate a simple supper. "4 hours each. I'll take first watch, you get some sleep." "I'm not sure I can sleep," Olivia admitted. The day's events kept replaying in her mind: the gunfire, the blood, the fear. "Try." His voice gentled. "You'll need your wits about you tomorrow." She nodded, retreating to the small bedroom that had been her father's. She lay down on the narrow bed, still in her clothes, listening to Dawson's quiet movements in the main room. Despite her certainty that sleep would elude her, exhaustion soon claimed her. Olivia woke to a touch on her shoulder. Dawson was leaning over her, his face half illuminated by the oil lamp he carried. "Your watch," he said softly. She sat up, disoriented. "What time is it?" "Just past midnight." "All's quiet so far." As she rose, he handed her the shotgun. "Stay on the porch. Listen more than you look. Your ears will tell you things your eyes miss. If you hear anything unusual, wake me immediately." The night air was cool as she settled onto a chair on the porch, wrapped in a woolen blanket. The vast dome of stars above made her feel small and insignificant, a speck in the universe's grand design. Yet there was comfort in that smallness too, a reminder that her troubles were temporary in the grand scheme of things. The hours passed slowly. Occasionally, a night bird called or something rustled in the underbrush, but nothing alarming broke the peace. As promised, Dawson emerged just before dawn to relieve her. "You should have woken me sooner," she protested, seeing the fatigue in his eyes. "You needed the rest." He took the shotgun from her. "Go on inside. Make some coffee if you're up to it." The routine established itself over the next day and night. They took turns watching, prepared more defenses, and spoke little beyond what was necessary. Yet in that silence, something was growing between them, a respect, an understanding, perhaps even the beginnings of trust. On the morning of the third day, as they shared breakfast, Dawson finally opened up a little. "I was a deputy marshal," he said without preamble. "Based in Colorado." Olivia looked up from her plate, surprised by the sudden disclosure. "What happened?" His jaw tightened. "Murdoch and his gang came through a mining town I was stationed in. They tried to force out some of the smaller claim holders. When that didn't work, they escalated." Something in his tone made Olivia's heart ache in anticipation. "What did they do?" "They burned down a cabin. Family of 4 was inside." His eyes grew distant. "I got there too late. The youngest was just 3 years old." Olivia's hand flew to her mouth. "That's monstrous." "Yes." The word was clipped, hard. "I tracked them for weeks, nearly had them cornered when politics got in the way. The territorial judge was being paid off. He threw out the case for lack of evidence despite my eyewitness testimony." "So you resigned?" "After putting my fist through the judge's face, yes." A grim smile touched his lips. "Been tracking Murdoch ever since, trying to catch him red-handed so not even a corrupt judge could let him walk." "Is that why you came here? You knew he'd try something?" Dawson nodded. "When I heard about a new widow holding a gold claim, it wasn't hard to figure where Murdoch would strike next." His words hung in the air between them. Olivia felt a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. This man had put himself in danger for justice, for people he'd never met. For her, "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling me, for being here." Their eyes met across the table and something electric passed between them. For a moment, Olivia forgot about claim jumpers and gold and danger. There was only this man, with his storm-gray eyes and the weight of purpose in his shoulders. The moment shattered at the sound of approaching horses, many horses. Dawson was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. "Get to your position," he ordered, all softness gone from his voice. Olivia grabbed the shotgun and moved to her designated window. Through the glass, she could see at least 10 riders approaching Murdoch at their head, his arm in a crude sling. "Looks like he brought reinforcements," she called to Dawson, who had taken position by the front door. "As expected." His voice was calm, almost detached. "Remember what we discussed. Stay low, wait for my signal." The riders halted about 50 yards from the cabin. Murdoch raised his good arm, signaling to his men to spread out in a wide semicircle. "Lawson," he shouted, "we know you're in there. You and the woman come out now, and maybe we won't burn this place to the ground." Dawson didn't respond immediately. He caught Olivia's eye and nodded toward the back window. According to their plan, if things went badly, she was to slip out that way and make for the cover of the trees behind the cabin. "Murdoch," he finally called back, "I see jail time hasn't taught you any manners. This is your last warning." Murdoch's voice had risen an octave. "I've got 10 men here, all itching to send you to hell. Seems a waste of manpower," Dawson replied conversationally. "Especially since half your boys look like they'd rather be anywhere else." It was true. Olivia realized as she studied the riders. Several looked nervous, shifting in their saddles and exchanging uncertain glances. These weren't hardened criminals like Murdoch, just hired guns who hadn't bargained for a standoff with someone as formidable as Dawson. Murdoch's face contorted with rage. "Fire!" he bellowed. A ragged volley of shots erupted, bullets thudding into the cabin walls and shattering one of the windows. Olivia ducked instinctively, heart racing. Dawson remained unnaturally calm. "Wait," he murmured, though she hadn't moved. "Let them waste ammunition." Another volley, then a pause as the riders reloaded. "Now," Dawson said, raising his rifle to his shoulder. "Aim for the horses." Olivia's stomach clenched at the thought, but she understood the strategy. Without mounts, the claim jumpers would be at a severe disadvantage. Dawson's first shot cracked through the air, followed almost immediately by a horse's terrified whinny. The animal reared, throwing its rider before bolting. Olivia aimed at the ground near another horse's feet and fired the shotgun, the blast sending 2 more mounts into a panic. Chaos erupted among the claim jumpers as their horses bucked and scattered, some dragging their riders whose boots had caught in the stirrups. 3 men were down, either thrown or wounded, while others struggled to control their frightened animals. "Cover me," Dawson ordered, slipping out the door in a half-crouch. Olivia's heart leapt to her throat as she watched him dart from the porch to a stack of crates they'd positioned as cover the day before. He was exposing himself to fire, drawing attention away from her position. She fired again, aiming wide but creating enough noise to add to the confusion. Through the din, she heard Dawson's rifle crack repeatedly, each shot precise and purposeful. 2 more claim jumpers fell, clutching wounded arms or legs. Murdoch was shouting, trying to rally his remaining men, but it was a losing battle. Without horses, caught in the open, they were easy targets for Dawson's marksmanship. "Fall back," Murdoch finally yelled, desperation evident in his voice. "Fall back to the trees." The surviving claim jumpers needed no encouragement, scrambling toward the cover of a small copse of cottonwood some 100 yards distant. They dragged their wounded companions with them, leaving 2 men lying motionless in the dust. As suddenly as it had begun, the gunfire ceased. Smoke drifted across the yard, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder. Dawson remained in his position, rifle trained on the retreating figures. "Are they leaving?" Olivia called softly. "Regrouping," he replied. "Stay alert." For nearly an hour nothing happened. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the yard where 2 bodies lay still. Olivia's throat was dry, her hands cramped from clutching the shotgun. Then, from the direction of the cottonwoods, a voice called out. "Lawson, can we talk terms?" Dawson's expression hardened. "What terms, Murdoch?" "Surrender and stand trial, or keep fighting and die here. How about we both walk away? You let me and my men go, we leave the woman and her claim alone. For good. Not good enough." Dawson's voice carried easily across the distance. "Too many people dead because of you. It ends today." A tense silence followed. Olivia could almost feel Murdoch's desperation from where she stood. "I've got a man flanking your position," Murdoch finally called. "He's got a clear shot at the woman. You sure you want to play this game?" Dawson's eyes met Olivia's, a silent question in them. She shook her head slightly. She'd been watching the back of the cabin. No one had approached. "You're bluffing," Dawson called back. "And you're running out of options." The crack of a rifle split the air, and Olivia gasped as splinters flew from the window frame inches from her head. She ducked, heart pounding. It hadn't been a bluff after all. Dawson reacted instantly, swinging his rifle toward the source of the shot, a flash of movement in the scrub to the east of the cabin. He fired twice in rapid succession, and a cry of pain told them he'd found his mark. "That's one less man you've got, Murdoch," Dawson called, his voice hard as iron. "How many more are you willing to sacrifice?" No response came from the cottonwoods. Minutes ticked by in tense silence. "What are they doing?" Olivia whispered. "Deciding whether it's worth it," Dawson replied, not taking his eyes from the tree line. "Murdoch's running out of men willing to die for him." As if to confirm his words, they saw movement among the distant trees, figures mounting the few horses they'd managed to recapture. "They're leaving," Olivia breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Dawson shook his head. "Not all of them." He nodded toward a flicker of movement to their right. "Murdoch's making one last play." Staying low, he moved back toward the cabin, signaling for Olivia to keep watching the cottonwoods. "If they start riding this way, fire a warning shot," he instructed before disappearing around the corner of the building. Heart in her throat, Olivia divided her attention between the distant trees and the spot where she'd last seen Dawson. Minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. The riders among the cottonwoods remained still, neither advancing nor retreating. Then, a shout from behind the cabin, the crack of a gunshot. Another. Unable to bear the uncertainty, Olivia abandoned her post and ran toward the back door, shotgun clutched to her chest. As she rounded the corner of the cabin, she saw them, Dawson and Murdoch, locked in a desperate struggle, rolling in the dust. Murdoch's revolver lay several feet away, while Dawson's was still holstered, apparently forgotten in the heat of hand-to-hand combat. Murdoch had size on his side, but Dawson fought with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime in such conflicts. As Olivia watched, frozen in horror and fascination, Dawson landed a punishing blow to Murdoch's wounded shoulder, eliciting a howl of pain. Murdoch stumbled back, clutching his injury. His eyes, wild with pain and hatred, fell on Olivia and the shotgun in her hands. With a roar, he lunged toward her. She raised the weapon instinctively, but hesitated. Could she truly shoot a man in cold blood? The hesitation nearly cost her dearly. Murdoch was almost upon her when Dawson tackled him from behind, driving him face first into the hard, packed earth. "The gun, Olivia," Dawson shouted, struggling to keep Murdoch pinned. She rushed forward, pressing the shotgun's barrel against Murdoch's head. "Don't move," she ordered, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Murdoch went still, the fight draining out of him as he realized his position. Dawson rose carefully, pulling rope from his belt. With swift, practiced movements, he bound Murdoch's hands behind his back. "Your men are abandoning you," he told the claim jumper as he worked. "Seems they've decided you're not worth dying for." Indeed, looking back toward the cottonwoods, Olivia could see the remaining riders were retreating, kicking up dust as they galloped away. "They'll be back," Murdoch spat, though the bravado in his voice rang hollow. "No, they won't." Dawson hauled him to his feet. "And neither will you. The marshal's due in Copper Canyon tomorrow. You'll be waiting for him in the town jail." Olivia lowered the shotgun, suddenly aware of how close she'd come to pulling the trigger. Her hands began to tremble. Dawson must have noticed, for his expression softened as he looked at her. "It's over," he said gently. "You're safe now." Relief washed over her in a dizzying wave. The danger that had hung over her for days was finally gone. Her father's claim was secure. "Thank you," she whispered, the words entirely inadequate for what he'd done. Something passed between them then, a connection that transcended the violence and fear of the past days. In his eyes, she saw not just the hard-edged lawman who'd fought to protect her, but a man capable of tenderness, of understanding. "We should get moving," he said after a moment. "It's a long ride to town." They bound Murdoch to his own horse, collected the other dead or wounded claim jumpers, and prepared for the journey to Copper Canyon. As they worked, Olivia found herself wondering what would come next. Would Dawson simply deliver Murdoch to justice and ride away? The thought left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "What will you do after this?" she asked as they mounted up, Dawson leading Murdoch's horse on a short tether. "See justice done," he replied. "Make sure Murdoch stands trial for all his crimes, not just the ones against you." And then he glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." The ride to Copper Canyon took most of the day. They traveled in relative silence, Murdoch occasionally cursing or threatening but mostly sulking in defeated silence. The town appeared on the horizon just as the sun was beginning its descent, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a dusty main street, with a few newer stone structures indicating prosperity from the surrounding mines. The town marshal, a barrel-chested man named Harkins, was suitably impressed by Dawson's capture of the notorious claim jumper. "Been hearing about Murdoch's gang for months," he said as they locked the prisoner in a cell. "Never thought I'd see him brought in trussed up like a Christmas turkey." "He'll hang for what he's done," Dawson said, more statement than question. "If I have anything to say about it, yes." Marshal Harkins turned to Olivia. "You're Thomas Oakley's daughter. Heard about your pa's passing. My condolences." "Thank you," Olivia replied. "Will you need my testimony against Murdoch?" "In a few days, yes. The circuit judge arrives next week." The marshal glanced between her and Dawson. "You're welcome to stay in town until then. Mrs. Finch runs a clean boarding house just down the street." As they stepped back onto the boardwalk, the setting sun bathed the town in golden light. After the intensity of the past days, the mundane sights of townsfolk going about their business seemed almost surreal. "I should get a room at the boarding house," Olivia said, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after the fight and long ride. Dawson nodded. "I'll see to the horses." Will I see you later?" Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps. "Yes." "We should discuss what happens next." They parted ways, Olivia to secure lodging and Dawson to the livery stable. The boarding house proved to be a tidy two-story building with crisp curtains in the windows. Mrs. Finch, a plump widow with kind eyes, fussed over Olivia's travel-worn appearance and showed her to a small but comfortable room. "Bath's down the hall," she informed Olivia. "Dinner's at 6, but I can set something aside if you're late." The luxury of a proper bath after days of fear and vigilance was almost overwhelming. Olivia soaked until the water cooled, washing away dust and tension. Dressed in clean clothes from her saddlebags, She felt almost like herself again, except she wasn't quite the same woman who'd stood on that porch facing Murdoch's threats days ago. When she descended to the dining room, she found Dawson already seated at a small table by the window. He'd cleaned up as well, his dark hair still damp from washing, face freshly shaved. Without trail dust and the constant alertness of danger, he looked younger, though no less formidable. "Miss Oakley," he stood as she approached, pulling out a chair for her. "Mr. Lawson," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips despite the formality. After what they'd been through together, such courtesies seemed almost absurd. Mrs. Finch served a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread, the finest food Olivia had tasted since leaving the East. They ate in companionable silence for a while, both savoring the simple pleasure of a good meal after days of tension. "The marshal thinks the trial will be straightforward," Dawson said eventually. "With our testimony and the evidence against Murdoch from previous crimes, he shouldn't escape justice this time." "Good." Olivia set down her fork. "But that's not what you wanted to discuss, is it?" His gray eyes met hers directly. "No, I wanted to talk about your claim." "What about it?" "It's valuable land from what your father's letters indicated. Once word gets out that Murdoch's been captured, it'll be safer, but—" He hesitated. "Gold claims attract trouble like honey attracts flies. You might face similar problems in the future." Olivia nodded slowly. "I've considered that. I could sell the claim, I suppose. That would be the simplest option." His tone was carefully neutral. "You could return east with enough money to start that school you mentioned." The thought should have been appealing. Wasn't that her original plan? Yet something held her back, something beyond loyalty to her father's memory. "And if I decided to stay," she asked, "to work the claim myself?" Surprise flashed across Dawson's face. "It's hard work, dangerous too, especially for a woman alone." "I wouldn't necessarily be alone." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither of them had put into words. Dawson set his napkin aside, his expression thoughtful. "Are you asking me to stay, Miss Oakley?" "Olivia," she corrected softly. "And yes, I suppose I am. Not out of fear or necessity, but because—" She took a breath. "Because I think there could be something worth exploring between us." He was silent for a long moment, and Olivia feared she'd misjudged the connection she'd felt growing between them. But then he reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "I've been drifting a long time," he said, his voice low. "Following vengeance more than justice, if I'm honest with myself. I hadn't thought about stopping, about building something instead of tearing down." Hope bloomed in Olivia's chest. "And now—" His thumb traced a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. "Now I'm thinking there might be gold worth finding that isn't in the ground." The week that followed passed in a curious mixture of tension and contentment. By day, they gave statements to the marshal, prepared for the upcoming trial, and began discussions about the practical aspects of working Olivia's claim. By evening, they strolled through Copper Canyon's modest streets, getting to know each other beyond the crisis that had brought them together. Dawson spoke of his childhood in Missouri, his years as a lawman, the family he rarely saw. Olivia told him of her teaching career, her mother's early death, her father's restless dreams of fortune in the West. Each revelation, each shared memory, wove another thread in the connection growing between them. "I've been thinking," Dawson said one evening as they walked back to the boarding house, the stars emerging in the deepening twilight, "about the claim." "What about it?" Olivia asked. "It's a promising vein, but it'll need investment to develop properly. Equipment, labor." "I know. I've been calculating the costs. It's daunting." He nodded. "There's a man in town, Alexander Whitfield, owns the largest mine in the area. He's been looking to expand his operations." Olivia frowned. You think I should sell to him after all? No. Dawson stopped walking, turning to face her. I think you should consider a partnership. You retain ownership, but Whitfield provides the capital and expertise to develop the claim properly. You'd share the profits. Would he agree to such an arrangement? I spoke with him this afternoon. He's interested. Says your father's claim is situated in a promising location. He'd want to inspect it, of course, but preliminarily, he's willing to discuss terms. Olivia studied Dawson's face in the fading light. You've been busy. A smile touched his lips, just exploring options. The decision is yours, of course. Our decision, she corrected gently, if you're staying. Something warm kindled in his eyes. I'm staying. The circuit judge arrived in Copper Canyon 3 days later, a stern-faced man named Judge Hollister, with a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for corruption. The trial was held in the town's newly built courthouse, with most of the townsfolk in attendance, eager to witness the prosecution of the infamous claim jumper. Olivia's testimony was straightforward. She recounted Murdoch's threats, the attack on her cabin, the evidence that he'd been targeting other claim holders in the area. Dawson's testimony carried more weight, detailing not only the recent events but Murdoch's previous crimes in Colorado and elsewhere. The defense had little to work with. Murdoch's own men had abandoned him, some even testifying against him in exchange for leniency. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. Silas Murdoch, Judge Hollister intoned, for the crimes of claim jumping, extortion, assault, and attempted murder, I hereby sentence you to hang by the neck until dead. Sentence to be carried out 1 week from today. Justice had been served, but Olivia took no pleasure in the sentence. As they left the courthouse, she was quiet, contemplative, having second thoughts. Dawson asked as they walked in the direction of the boarding house. Not about us, she clarified quickly. About all of this. A month ago, I was teaching children their letters. Now I've testified to send a man to the gallows. Dawson nodded, understanding. The West changes you. For better or worse depends on the person, I think. And how has it changed me? He considered her, his gaze warm. Made you stronger. More certain of what you want. Less willing to let others decide your path. She smiled at that. I suppose that's true. And how has it changed you, given me something to build rather than just enemies to chase? He took her hand, a gesture that still sent a thrill through her despite its growing familiarity. A future to look toward instead of a past to avenge. That evening, they met with Alexander Whitfield at the town's finest restaurant, a relatively modest establishment by Eastern standards, but impressive for a frontier mining town. Whitfield proved to be a shrewd but fair businessman, genuinely interested in developing the claim rather than simply acquiring it. Oakley had a good eye, he said as they discussed terms over steaks and potatoes. That whole area's promising. With proper equipment and a few experienced miners, we could be looking at a substantial yield. I want to be involved, Olivia stipulated. Not just a silent partner collecting dividends. Whitfield raised an eyebrow. Most ladies wouldn't want anything to do with the day-to-day operations of a mine, Miss Oakley. I'm not most ladies. Her tone brooked no argument. I've helped manage my father's general store back east since I was 16. I understand business, accounts, inventory. The mine owner glanced at Dawson, who simply smiled. She means it, Dawson confirmed, and she's more than capable. Whitfield chuckled. Very well. We can discuss specifics tomorrow, draw up proper papers. After dinner, they walked in the cool evening air. Copper Canyon was settling into its nighttime routine, saloons filling with miners, shopkeepers closing up, families retreating to their homes. Are you sure about this? Dawson asked as they paused on the bridge spanning the small creek that gave the town its name. "It won't be an easy life." Olivia leaned against the wooden railing, watching the water flow beneath them, silver in the moonlight. "I'm sure. The school will still happen, I'll see to that. But there's something about this place, this life. It feels right, in a way teaching back east never quite did. And us." His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the vulnerability beneath. She turned to face him, heart full. "That feels right, too. More than right." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek with a gentleness that belied his strength. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in. Their first kiss was soft, tentative, a question and answer all at once. When they parted, his eyes held a warmth that made her breath catch. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "When I rode up to your cabin that morning, I was only thinking about stopping Murdoch. I never imagined." "I know." She smiled, reaching up to touch his face, the stubble rough beneath her fingertips. "Life has a way of surprising us." The partnership with Whitfield was formalized the following day, the contract stipulating Olivia's active role in managing the mine's business affairs and guaranteeing her majority ownership. Development began almost immediately, with equipment and experienced miners arriving within the week. Dawson proved invaluable, his knowledge of the territory and its people smoothing the way for the operation. He hired trustworthy men, negotiated with suppliers, and kept a vigilant eye for any trouble that might threaten their enterprise. In the months that followed, Olivia split her time between the mine and Copper Canyon, where she'd begun efforts to establish the school she'd always dreamed of. The town council had agreed to allocate land for the building, and with some of the first profits from the mine, construction was underway. Their relationship deepened with each passing day. Dawson's protective instincts remained, but they were balanced by a profound respect for Olivia's independence and determination. For her part, Olivia came to understand the man behind the gunfighter's facade, his sense of justice, his unexpected gentleness, his dry humor that emerged more frequently as the shadows of his past receded. They were married that winter in Copper Canyon's newly completed church. The town turned out in force for the celebration, from Whitfield in his fine Eastern suit to the miners in their Sunday best. Even old Wu made the journey from his remote homestead, bearing a gift of intricate carvings he'd crafted himself. Spring brought the completion of the schoolhouse, and the arrival of the first students' children of miners, shopkeepers, and ranchers from the surrounding area. Olivia taught 3 days a week, balancing her educational calling with her responsibilities at the mine, which was now producing enough gold to ensure their financial security. As summer approached, they moved into a new house on the edge of town, larger than the cabin where they'd met, but still modest by Eastern standards. Dawson had insisted on building a wide porch that wrapped around the front, where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun set behind the mountains. "I have news," Olivia said one such evening, joining him on the porch swing after finishing her lesson plans for the school. "Good news, I hope." He set aside the newspaper he'd been reading. "I believe so." She took his hand, placing it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a child." The wonder that spread across his face, the joy that lit his eyes, was a treasure beyond any gold they might mine. He pulled her close, his kiss conveying what words could not. "When?" he asked when they finally parted. "January, the doctor thinks." Dawson smiled, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child. "A new year, a new life. Are you happy?" She asked, though she already knew the answer. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He gazed out at the landscape. They'd both come to love the rugged mountains, the vast sky, the town growing and thriving in the valley below. When I rode up to your cabin that morning, I never imagined I'd find everything I never knew I was looking for." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, content in the life they'd built together. From threat and danger had come love and purpose. From a desperate stand against claim, Jumpers had come a future neither of them could have envisioned. Their son was born in the deep of winter, a healthy, strong-lunged boy. They named Thomas, after Olivia's father. He grew into a curious, adventurous child with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determined spirit. By the time he was 5, the Copper Canyon School had expanded to 3 teachers and over 60 students. The mine continued to produce, though Whitfield had developed other claims in the area that proved even more profitable. Olivia and Dawson diversified their interests, investing in the growing town and establishing a foundation to support education throughout the territory. Life wasn't without challenges. The West was still wild in many ways and dangers remained. But together, they faced whatever came their way, stronger for having found each other that fateful morning when claim jumpers threatened and a cowboy stood ready to defend what was right. Years later, when Thomas was grown with children of his own, he would often ask his parents to retell the story of how they met. Olivia would smile at Dawson, now gray at the temples but still straight-backed and clear-eyed, and he would begin. "It was dawn, and I was standing on your mother's porch when the sun rose.